Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There are things that whisper in the warp that no daemon dares to name. Amid the screaming tides of madness and the shrieking gales of unreal thought, there are shadows that slither beneath even the notice of the chaos gods. Shadows that hunt, devour, and vanish without leaving a single psychic trace. They are not beings in the conventional sense. They are violations of essence, anomalies of hunger, older and crueler than fear itself. The daemons of the warp, horrors given form by raw emotion and divine blasphemy, hold dominion across the immaterium. But even they recoil when these things move, when they feed. The Imperium's priests and scholars would never speak of such entities publicly. The Ordo Malleus denies their existence outright. But those who have seen warp beasts through soul sight or heard them gnashing through demonic legions like wolves in lambskin orgies of annihilation know a deeper truth. Some monsters do not play by the rules of chaos. Some predators do not bow to gods. Some things that live in the warp are not alive in any form that mortals or immortals were meant to understand. They are the final silence at the edge of madness, the warp beasts that even daemons fear. To understand the nature of warp predators, one must first strip away the lies the Imperium tells to preserve what little sanity remains in its fragile grip. The warp is not a realm of rules. It is a storm of emotions, concepts, and impossibilities, a sea in which thought and soul dissolve into one another. But even within that madness, there are patterns, ecosystems of suffering and ecstasy, an order of sorts imposed by the chaos gods. Within their realms, daemons feast, fight, and propagate their corruption according to the divine will of their creators. That is the natural state of the immaterium. And yet, the existence of warp predators, things outside the pantheon, outside even the demonic hierarchies, suggests a violation so profound it renders the concept of natural meaningless. These are not daemons. They do not emerge from mortal emotions. They do not serve Khorne or Tzeentch, nor do they crave the plagues of Nurgle or the ecstasies of Slaanesh. They are alien, not in the Xenos sense, but in a way that breaks the soul's ability to classify. Their movements are not dictated by passion or devotion. They do not manipulate or corrupt. They simply exist and consume. And therein lies their horror. Daemons understand desire. Even the most bloodthirsty of Khornate warfiends kill with reason, with purpose. Warp predators kill without context, without message, without ideology. Their very presence suggests that the warp is more than a mirror of mortal emotion. It is a breeding ground for things that feel no emotion at all. They are silence in a realm of eternal screaming. They are hunger that is not lust, not rage, not want, only absence. Reports from surviving psychers speak of voids in the psychic field, of null perception, as if the warp itself forgets its own shape around these entities. Their approach is not heralded by demonic drums or shrieking warp storms, but by an absence of sensation so profound it feels like dying in reverse. Daemons flee these zones. Some dissolve outright. Others are torn apart and devoured, not for nourishment, but seemingly as a side effect of proximity, as if their existence is incompatible with these predators, like frost-shattering flame. There are no names for these entities in the lexicon of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. The Ordo Malleus archives contain only redacted glyphs, erratic in style and maddening in their contradictions. Some texts refer to null worms or unforms. Others simply call them the hungering. The term warp beast is perhaps the closest our language comes to approximating them, but even that implies a bestiality they do not always display. Some move like concepts given form, patterns of logic that tear through thoughts like claws. Others shift constantly, never revealing the same shape twice. One thing is certain, their presence violates the tenets of the Emperor's understanding of the warp. They are not anomalies, they are predators, and the warp is their hunting ground. Unlike daemons, which require belief and emotion to exist, warp predators manifest in ways that suggest independence from mortal consciousness. Some have been spotted in dead zones of the galaxy, where no psychic presence has touched for millennia. Some appear at the edges of warp storms, tearing through the demonic hosts that ride those tempests like sea serpents through surf. And still others seem to be drawn to high concentrations of psychic energy, not to join the orgy of chaos, but to feed on it. Their patterns are erratic, their motives unknowable, but what remains consistent is their effect. The demonic presence in any region they touch diminishes, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. There are theories, wild, heretical, beautiful theories. One suggests that these predators are antibodies of the warp, immune responses to the disease of chaos. Another that they are the remnants of a previous reality, trapped in the immaterium like parasites in a dying god's blood. Still others whisper that they are simply older than the chaos gods, survivors of a time before emotion took form. These ideas are banned, of course. Possessing such thoughts is grounds for execution. But they linger, as all beautiful lies do, because they explain the unexplainable. Perhaps the most chilling theory, though, is the simplest one. That these predators are natural. That in a realm of madness and emotion, apex predators would, over time, evolve not to feel, but to erase feeling. That their survival depends on consuming complexity, thought, identity, fear, and simplifying it into nothingness. And that at the apex of such a food chain is something we cannot even begin to imagine. Only feel, for a moment, before we vanish. Before the dark age of technology, before even the rise of human civilization on Terra, the galaxy shuddered beneath the weight of the unknown. The age of strife, that terrible epoch of anarchy and isolation, birthed nightmares that would never be recorded, let alone remembered. Yet even that may not have been the true beginning. Within the deeper strata of the warp, where time shivers and history fractures, there are impressions, not memories, of creatures that do not fit within the taxonomy of chaos. These are the monsters of old night, forgotten not because they are unworthy of memory, but because remembering them courts annihilation. Some scholars of the forbidden lore posit that the warp was never empty. That before the chaos gods coalesced from the tides of sentient thought, something else stirred in the immaterium. Primal instincts, proto-predators, not born of mortal emotion, but of the warp's own paradoxical biology. Entities that hunted in a sea of unformed thought, preying upon nascent dreams and concepts before they could take shape. The birth of the ruinous powers did not banish these creatures. It drove them deeper into the folds of unreality that even Daemons dare not tread. And there they wait still. The Adeptus Mechanicus rarely speaks of what was found on the edges of the halo stars, but fragmentary accounts from exploratory data cores hint at ruins not built, but grown. Structures twisted from psycho-reactive material that bleed ink-like darkness under observation. Some believe these are remnants of civilizations swallowed whole by warp predators in ages past. Entire psychic species devoured before the Imperium ever charted the stars. The echo of their minds now haunts these relics, like insect wings trapped in amber. And sometimes, when the wind of unreality stirs just right, something stirs back. One tale speaks of a nomadic Xenos race known only as the Thranxi, now extinct. Their culture lost before humanity developed language. All that remains are visual records etched into the rock walls of a dead moon. Crude images of towering serpents made of eyes and mouths, chasing souls across a sky of flame. The final image is always the same, a great mouth consuming a sun, and behind it, rows of smaller mouths, nested like fractals, each devouring something more abstract than the last. Time, language, self. This matches eerily with Imperial reports from certain rogue psychers who claim to have seen similar shapes in their dreams, long before they were trained to use their gifts. In some interpretations, this suggests that these ancient predators still whisper across time, imprinting fragments of themselves on sensitive minds. Others argue that these echoes are warnings, subconscious attempts by the warp to defend itself against the return of its oldest nightmares. The most feared of these theoretical entities is known among certain heretical inquisitorial circles as Velm Haranoth, a name reportedly spoken only once by an alpha-level psyker before her brain ignited into warp fire. Descriptions vary wildly. Some say it has no form. Others claim it is a library of moving bone, or a spiral of hungering teeth that eats concepts rather than flesh. But what remains consistent is its behavior. It consumes not individuals, but the cultural memory of civilizations. Worlds wake to find their myths missing. No oral histories. No religious dogma. Just silence where once stories lived. It is as if their ancestors never existed. Could these things be true survivors from before the pantheon of chaos? It is possible, if terrifying. The immaterium is not a singular entity, it is layered, chaotic, non-linear. Beings spawned in its early phases would not think like us or like demons. They would not hunger for worship. They would not revel in war or pleasure or decay. They would simply feed, and they would survive. It is even theorized in the deepest vaults of Ordo Xenos and Ordo Malleus alike that some of the so-called Emperor-class anomalies encountered during the Crusade era, vast psychic disturbances blamed on warp storms or demonic incursion, were actually the passing of one of these ancient predators. So subtle, so fast, and so complete was the devouring that only a handful of psychometric aftershocks hinted that anything had occurred at all. The local warp space would be strangely cold. The Daemons, gone. Not defeated, evaporated. It's not a stretch to consider that some of the more incomprehensible alien ruins scattered across the segmentum obscurus may be the excrement or territorial markings of such predators. Not built, but extruded, a byproduct of a creature too vast and abstract to understand. Like the rings left in Saturn's atmosphere by an invisible hand. In the grim darkness of the far future, it is comforting to believe that there is only war. That humanity's nightmares wear names, Abaddon, Mortarion, Kabanda. But out in the dark, beyond what even the warp has claimed, something more ancient waits. Something that remembers a time before memory. Something that once fed on gods that never had names. And might do so again. Within the cloistered archives of the Ordo Malleus, there exists a whisper of a system, one not acknowledged officially by the Inquisition or recorded in any sanctioned grimoires. It is said to be used by those inquisitors who have walked too long in the shadow of the warp, whose retinues carry scars not just of flesh, but of soul. This is the Hecaton classification, a clandestine attempt to codify warp entities that defy the chaos gods, that operate beyond the limits of demonic taxonomy. Hecaton-class entities. The hundredfold monsters, the impossible predators. The name Hecaton itself evokes a sense of multiplicity, of layered nightmares that cannot be pinned down to a single origin, shape, or purpose. These are not the daemons of the pantheon, nor are they warp echoes of mortal belief. The Hecaton system emerged from necessity, not theory. Inquisitors encountering horrors that shrugged off traditional banishments, that consumed psychic wards as if they were fuel rather than barriers, needed language. And so they created it in the dark, quietly, desperately. Each Hecaton-class designation corresponds not to a species, but to a behavioral archetype, though even that term falls short. These categories are based on how the entity interacts with reality, not what it looks like. One such classification is the Echo Flayer, a predator that devours not bodies or souls, but moments. Survivors of Echo Flayer events report fragmented timelines, looping nightmares, and the sickening sense that something essential has been erased from their personal history. Families forget they ever existed. Time itself seems to fray. In one instance, an entire research outpost on the fringes of the Eye of Terror was found intact, fully operational, yet no records remained of its construction, and every cogitator returned invalid query when asked who built it. Then there are the soul latticers, entities that do not feed in the traditional sense, but instead weave the psychic remnants of their prey into impossible structures. Conceptual prisons built from sentient thought. A Grey Knight strike team tasked with purging a demon-infested asteroid found such a structure. A temple of writhing mind stuff, within which echoes of the fallen replayed their final moments endlessly. The team's psyker was driven mad attempting to read its purpose. He died muttering a phrase repeated in dozens of dead tongues. It builds the cage to fit the god. Of all the Hecaton classes, none is more feared than the Threnodians, so named for the psychic wailing that precedes their manifestation. Not sound, but a lament that fills the warp like the scream of a dying concept. These predators are drawn to apocalyptic moments, planetary extinction events, the deaths of faiths, the collapse of reality anchors. They do not cause such events, but they arrive like vultures, or perhaps auditors, to consume what remains. Multiple black ships have vanished en route to Terra under the suspected influence of Threnodians, their last astropathic messages reduced to incoherent howling in frequencies no living mind should hear. The Inquisition does not officially recognize the Hecaton system. To do so would be to admit a truth that would shatter the already fragile theological framework upon which the Imperium balances. For to acknowledge these predators is to accept that chaos is not the only force in the warp, that there are older, stranger laws in operation. Laws of predation, recursion, consumption, and erasure, and that even the ruinous powers are subject to these laws. Yet the data accumulates. In the wake of unexplained psychic voids, inquisitors working in isolation begin to use hecaton classifications in their private notes. Some radical elements within the Ordo Malleus have begun to form cults of understanding around the system, not worshipping the predators, but attempting to map their behaviors, to predict their cycles. These cults do not last long. Madness claims most. The ecclesiarchy burns the rest, but the rumors persist. Of certain high-level inquisitors requesting specific patterns of psychic shielding before warp travel. Of librarians who no longer draw directly on the warp, but channel its energies through layers of mediating thought forms in hopes of avoiding the attention of hecaton-class predators. Of titans built with non-Euclidean geometries not for stylistic flourish, but to make them invisible to entities that see in logic rather than light. Perhaps the most disturbing implication of the hecaton system is what it leaves out. If the hundredfold is merely what has been encountered, what lies beyond that number? What has not yet revealed itself? And what cost will be exacted when it finally does? In the dark, the Imperium does not whisper these names. It dreams them. Nightmares codified in secret lexicons, fear carved into data slates and buried under stasis seals. Hecaton-class entities are not enemies to be fought. They are reminders that in the warp, survival is not about strength or faith. It is about being beneath notice. Unappetizing. Forgotten. For those who are noticed, those who attract the gaze of the hundredfold predators are not merely doomed. They are erased. The legend of the hollow howlers of Nastrum's grave is whispered with dread among the Night Lords, though few of them speak of it openly. Nastrum is dead. Of course, its corpse a jagged ruin drifting in the void, cracked open by orbital bombardment and flayed by warp storms for centuries. But even the legion that once called it home avoids certain coordinates near its remains. Coordinates known not for tactical disadvantage or strategic insignificance, but for what should be there and isn't. No signal, no return, no echo, only silence, yawning and unbroken, as if reality itself refuses to acknowledge the space. It was there that the ghost fleet disappeared. The fleet in question was a scavenger armada, assembled from derelict Night Lords' vessels and deranged mercenary ships desperate for the artifacts rumored to remain buried in the vaults beneath Nastrum's crust. The Night Lords who led the expedition were not fools. They brought psychers, augurs, warp-seers, and a dozen unsanctioned astropaths. They were prepared for daemons, warp storms, rival warbands, even ancient imperial traps. But what they found, if anything was found at all, left no record behind. Vox traffic ceased in stages. Not with screaming, not with battle sign, just loss. First the frigates, then the light cruisers, then the command ship itself. Their last transmission, recovered from a corrupted data buoy, was a single fragment of Voxlog, a whisper, not in Low Gothic, but in something older. Perhaps it was a language. Perhaps it was simply the fleet being remembered incorrectly by the universe itself. The site is now known among the Night Lords as Nastrum's grave. It is not marked on maps. There are no coordinates given in the Legion's current data crypts. But the tale persists, passed between traitor warbands like a virus. Some say the warp beast that haunts the grave is a manifestation of Nastrum's death itself. A predator born from the soul of a murdered world. Others whisper that it is one of the original predators, attracted by the psychic resonance of so much unresolved violence. Whatever the truth, the pattern is always the same. Ships approach, Vox goes dark, psychic emissions fall silent, and no wreckage is ever found. What little is known of the hollow howlers comes from a survivor, or something claiming to be one. A single Night Lord's boarding craft was discovered adrift near the Cadian Gate, its crew slaughtered, but one figure remained in stasis. The entity within was once human, or Astartes, but had been warped beyond recognition. Flayed blue skin stretched too tight across a boneless frame. Its mouth was sewn shut, yet it spoke directly into the minds of those who examined it. Not with words, but with sensation. Grief, emptiness, the smell of scorched prayers, and beneath it all, a howling, not air moving through lungs, but a scream of conceptual absence, like a name that had never been spoken. Interrogation proved useless. The thing eventually disintegrated into vapor during a null-field test, leaving behind a single icon etched into the glass of its stasis chamber. An inverted eye, cracked like old stone, surrounded by teeth, not drawn but implied, as if the image had been burned into reality itself rather than etched. Since then, there have been other encounters, always on the edge of known space, always among debris fields where no battles were recorded. Black ships diverted without explanation. Astropathic signals that repeat the same sequence of low-frequency pulses, too weak to be messages, too structured to be noise. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica refuses to comment. The Inquisition says nothing, but there are records, hidden ones. Reports of crew disappearing not in bulk, but individually, as if plucked from existence. Each absence felt only after the fact. Memories that no longer align. A gunner whose name is remembered, but whose face is gone. A navigator's voice recorded on black box logs, but no record of him boarding the ship. Some believe the hollow howlers are not entities at all, but the consequence of proximity to one. A wake effect like heat distortion that twists memory, logic, and reality into consumable forms. Others claim they are entities, but ones so far removed from demonic paradigms that calling them creatures is like calling gravity an animal. They do not roar or hunt or pursue. They simply are. A presence that induces absence. A pattern that devours structure. A shadow cast not by light but by meaning. Whatever their true nature, one fact remains immutable. When they come, even demons vanish. No warp signatures, no remains, just blankness. The kind of silence that makes psychers weep. The kind of silence that suggests the warp itself is trying to forget what it has seen, or worse, what it has become. In the Immaterium, everything is hunger. But not all hunger is the same. Daemons hunger for emotion because it sustains them, defines them, shapes their very being. A daemon of Khorne devours wrath and battle lust. One of Slaanesh feasts on ecstasy and torment of the most exquisite kind. Even the plagues of Nurgle are not just rot, they are the repast of a god's joy, gluttony wrapped in grotesque benevolence. But warp predators, they feed on something entirely different. Something that suggests a form of consumption that the mortal mind isn't meant to understand. Not because it's unknowable, but because knowing it invites it closer. Reports from psychers who have brushed against these predators, often the last testimony before their minds collapse into catatonia, speak of a feeding that is not sensory, not even spiritual, but structural. The way these entities consume daemons is not just destruction. It's as if they unmake what it means to be a daemon. Core essences dissolve, no dispersal into the warp, no shriek back to the bosom of their chaos god, just a void where once there was something, a someone, screaming. What the predators consume isn't just energy or matter, it's pattern, identity, continuity. There are creatures within the known warp fauna, such as psychic leeches, mind leeches, shadow worms, that feed on psychers like parasites. These warp predators are not that. They are more akin to black holes of thought. Their appetite is total. They do not seek power. They do not seek dominion. They seek reduction. Every recorded instance, if the half-mad scrawlings of condemned astropaths can be called records, describes the aftermath in chilling terms. Not slaughtered, not consumed, but simplified. What once was complex, conscious, beautiful, or terrible, reduced to nothing, a kind of psychic entropy. Some survivors claim to have seen these entities pierce through demonic hosts like knives through shadow. No resistance, no impact, just absence in the wake. As if the predator wasn't feeding on flesh or spirit, but on the logic that allows such things to exist. It is speculated that this is why daemons fear them, why they flee from the merest scent of them across the warp. For the predator's feast isn't just destruction. It is erasure. An erasure in the warp, a realm built on meaning and emotion, is a horror far greater than death. There are reports, deliberately buried by the Ordo Malleus, of these predators attacking chaos-aligned psychers. Not in battle, not even in visible proximity. One moment, the psycher is chanting, channeling power from the warp. The next, their eyes widen in perfect, silent terror and their bodies collapse inward like crumpled scrolls. What remains is not a corpse, it's not even ash. It's a wound in the room, a lac shaped like a man. All psychic residue gone. Even psychic imprints, the kind the Adeptus Astra Telepathica uses to interrogate the dead, find nothing. Just silence, as if the moment never occurred. The Imperium has no name for this form of consumption. Some call it unmaking, others silencing. But the effect is always the same. These creatures consume not from malice but from function. The way a fire consumes oxygen, the way void consumes light. In their presence, structure cannot hold, memory fails, language deconstructs. And if you are a creature of belief, of will, of pattern, as all warp entities ultimately are, you die. Not gloriously, not with drama, but with a kind of existential shrug. The most terrifying reports come not from those who observe the aftermath, but from those who are consumed slowly. A handful of soul-bonded scribes have, through proximity, recorded the thoughts of the dying in the moments before contact. They speak of a presence so vast and cold that the warp itself becomes still. Of a gaze that does not see you, but reads you. Not your body, your logic, your essence. And then of a change, a forgetting, mid-thought, mid-word. Like drowning in a sea that was always dry. What does such a creature want? What does it find nourishing in the rich madness of the immaterium? Some say they consume intention. That the warp, being a realm of thought and belief, offers countless delicacies of focused desire, perfect for beings that crave the purity of a thing that means. Others believe they consume closure, seeking to end stories, erase loops, finish that which is infinite. They find a never-ending cycle of war and rebirth repulsive. They seek instead finality, termination. This would explain why they are drawn not to the vibrant heart of the warp, but to its borders, to places where demons war endlessly, where thoughts grow tired and emotions stagnate. There, among the faded echoes of conflict and belief, the predators feed, quietly, efficiently, indifferently. They are not evil, not even malicious. They simply function. They are the consumer of concepts, the eaters of narratives, the beasts that feed not on fear, but on the very framework that allows fear to exist. And in doing so, they threaten not just the daemons of the warp, but the warp itself. There is a stretch of space near the fringe of the segmentum obscurus where no imperial charts venture and no warp routes remain stable. The void there is silent, but not still. It breathes wrong. It feels wrong. This place is known by a name etched into the psychic whispers of astropaths and carved into the dreams of those touched by the warp. Cartha Nidrex. The system no longer appears on any current star maps, though it was once a waypoint for black ships, a designated extraction route for untrained psychers plucked from the Imperium's endless masses. That was before the screaming started. The event that birthed the legend is shrouded in silence, an irony so cruel it borders on blasphemy. A black ship, designation Verity's Mercy, vanished en route to Titan. Its cargo manifest listed nearly 2,000 psychers in various stages of sedation and null-field exposure. The ship's astropaths had logged a dozen minor demonic incursion signatures along its path, nothing unmanageable for a seasoned crew. Then, halfway through its transit, the astropathic beacon fell silent. No mayday, no warp surge, just a cessation. An absence so complete that the Astronomican's light flickered in that direction for over 10 Terran minutes, a phenomenon never before recorded and never explained. What followed was stranger still. For weeks afterward, astropaths across the sector began reporting dreams, not visions of fire or torment, not the usual symptoms of demonic incursion, but dreams of emptiness, empty corridors. Empty cells, empty eyes, and a whisper, repeated endlessly in untraceable dialects, "We are remembered not." The Administratum dismissed the reports, the Inquisition investigated and found nothing. No wreckage, no warp trail, no psychic residue, just cold space. And yet, psychers who approach the region now hear something, not with their ears, but with their souls. A keening, low and constant, like wind through the ruins of forgotten temples. Some cry out in terror and go mad. Others simply weep, claiming they can feel the psychers still aboard the ship, trapped, screaming without mouths in a place that remembers them only as ingredients. What resides at Cartha Nidrex is not a warp storm. It is not a demon world. It is something far worse, a sentient void. A hunger that is not just active, but curious. Attempts to send exploratory drones into the region end in failure. Data returns malformed. Video feeds display nothing but static, overlaid with the faint shapes of mouths opening and closing in slow, deliberate rhythm. But most unsettling are the voice logs. Drones have no crew, no voices to record. And yet, embedded deep within the corrupted audio, there are whispers, lists of names, Real names. Names of psychers harvested across the Imperium, some on those very ships, others lost decades before, names long buried or burned. The Ordo Malleus keeps a permanent watch near the fringe of the anomaly. Their station is not a fortress but a monastery of sorts, a place for quiet listening. Its sequestered psychers rotate out every 5 days. Any longer and their thoughts begin to sync with the rhythm of the Void's song. One inquisitor, upon hearing the song through a captured scribe's mind link, screamed until his throat burst. His last word, transcribed by autoquill, was amnesia. It was not his own. The theory forming among the most radical of warp scholars is that Carthanidrex is not merely a trap or a beast's lair, but the beast itself. That the space, the silence, the absence, it is all one thing. A psychic predator, not in the shape of a creature, but in the form of an idea. An idea so powerful that it consumes other ideas. It does not eat flesh. It eats context, structure, past. It consumes what you were until you are nothing but a ghost of implication. This would explain why psychers are especially vulnerable. They are their thoughts, their self-awareness, a beacon in the dark. Some go further, whispering that Carthanidrex was once a place of memory, a site where lost souls were gathered, catalogued, perhaps even mourned. And that something ancient, something wrong, found that grief palatable and began to feed. It is not unreasonable to imagine that such a being evolved not to kill, but to rewrite, to transform the death of a thing into the memory of it never having existed, a retroactive predator. What remains of Verity's mercy may still orbit within that sentient void, its hull twisted by impossible angles, its prisoners now part of something far vaster than they were meant to be. Some say that if you stand on the observation decks of the inquisitorial listening post on a moon near the anomaly's edge, you can see something at the center of the dark, a flicker. A shape not moving, but shifting between states of relevance. A ship, maybe. A face. A thought that once had weight and now floats, free of narrative. But even if you do see it, the moment you blink, it is gone. Not hidden, not cloaked, removed, as if your brain, recognizing its danger, chose to forget. Or perhaps it was helped by something that likes it that way. The Ordo Chronos is a riddle. Officially, it does not exist. Its operatives leave no sigils, no seals, no records. Even among the Inquisition, the name is whispered only in the most secure Vox-encrypted sanctums. And yet, wherever the timeline frays, wherever causality breaks or vanishes into paradox, there they are, shadowy figures clad in time-baffling armor, stepping from warp ships that do not seem to arrive so much as simply appear. Their mission is not to fight heresy, nor to purge mutation or Xenos corruption. Their purpose, if it can be called that, is to preserve the continuity of history. Or perhaps to prune it. It is within their secret archives that the most disturbing data concerning warp predators is believed to reside, specifically those connected not to hunger or fear, but to time. Not time as mortals know it, but the version of time that the warp sees. Not a line. A sea. A storm. A shape that folds in on itself, and sometimes bites. These predators are not drawn to violence or despair. They are drawn to anomaly, to rupture, to divergence. And it is in these moments where the universe flinches from its own reflection that the Ordo Chronos acts, or more accurately, reacts. Among their most secretive missions was the investigation of what came to be known as the Living Rift, a tear in the warp discovered near the remnants of the pre-imperial Arcanlite colony. The rift pulsed with irregular temporal echoes. Ships passing near it would sometimes emerge days before they entered. Others returned broken and empty, their logs reporting events that had not yet occurred. One vessel, the Light of Detritus, returned 100 years after being lost, with its crew still alive, unaged, and bearing memories of timelines no longer extant. It was here that Chronos agents encountered a predator that defied even their enhanced temporal cognition. Described only as it that moves through moments, the entity was never observed directly. Instead, it was felt as a sudden absence of consequence. A place where actions had no follow-through, where bullets did not hit, thoughts did not complete, and even gravity seemed to forget what it was meant to do. Survivors report a sensation of drowning in déjà vu, reliving the same breath, the same blink, as something circled them from outside causality. The predator did not kill in the traditional sense. It looped its prey. Trapped them in time edits so tight they ceased to change, ceased to matter. And then, when fully severed from the flow of cause and effect, they vanished. Not disintegrated, not warped, simply removed, like corrections in a script rewritten by a hand no one saw. The Ordo Chronos theorizes that this class of entity feeds not on emotion or thought, but on possibility, on alternate outcomes. It seeks ruptures where fate splinters, and it consumes those splinters before they can branch. This makes them fundamentally opposed to chaos, not as enemies, but as cleaners. Predators of instability. The warp thrives on contradiction and excess. These entities abhor it. They hunt instability the way lions hunt the lame. This brings with it terrifying implications. If these beings prey upon causal fractures, then every psychic, every daemon, every warp event that generates paradox is a flare to them, a dinner bell. And as the galaxy crumbles, as timelines grow tangled and broken by the countless errors of the Imperium and its enemies, the opportunities for feeding grow. They do not hasten the end. They clean up after it. Some believe these predators are not native to the warp at all, that they come from deeper still, places where time is not only a lie, but a sin. Places so antithetical to the warp's nature that even the chaos gods dare not look. The living rift may be one such entry point, or a wound, or a mouth. If this is true, then the warp itself is not the ultimate horror. It is merely the upper crust of something more ancient, something whose predators feed on daemons the way sharks feed on fish. Evidence for this lies in the aftermath of the rift. After a final Chronos extraction mission, the tier sealed abruptly, not with a bang, but a correction. Systems updated, events rewritten, ships that had been lost were suddenly never launched. Acolytes who had disappeared were now recorded as having died years earlier in unrelated incidents. And the world that hosted the rift? Gone. Not glassed, not destroyed, scrubbed. Maps corrected, logs overwritten, Vox records blank, a whole colony retroactively rendered as myth. To the Ordo Chronos, this is the ultimate threat, not merely death, not even chaos, but reconciliation, the erasure of errors so profound that they erase those who remember them. And what kind of creature requires that kind of food? Not one you can fight, not one you can flee, only one you might avoid by being unimportant, not divergent. A footnote in your own story. Perhaps that's what they're doing, not feeding, but editing, until the warp and everything in it makes sense. And if it must devour every demon, every soul, every god to do so, then perhaps that's the point. There is a heretical theory buried beneath redacted Mechanicus logs and forbidden inquisitorial records that the warp has an ecology, not a society, not a hierarchy, an ecology. And like any ecosystem, it has predators and prey. At the top, it was once assumed, were the chaos gods, the great psychic megafauna spawned from mortal emotions, each ruling their domain with unimaginable power. Below them, their demons. Below them, mortal psychers, whose minds touch the warp like blood and water. But if warp predators truly exist, and all evidence suggests they do, then this structure is flawed. It does not describe an apex. It describes an imbalance corrected by something far more ancient and far less worshipful. Predators not of emotion or faith, but of pattern, identity, and deviation. Apex predators in the truest sense. The warp is not a mirror. It is not even a reflection. It is a fluid continuum where thoughts become form and belief carves reality. Within such a system, the act of becoming, of evolving, inevitably produces complexity. Chaos thrives on this. Mutation, infinite variation, constant, unstable growth. But nature, in any form, does not permit unchecked expansion forever. For every explosion of life, there is a culling. For every rapid mutation, an extinction event. In this light, warp predators represent the evolutionary counterbalance to demons and gods alike. They are not the result of belief. They are the correction to it. Imagine a predator that does not stalk by scent or sight, but by narrative anomaly. It hunts not by detecting flesh or sound, but by sensing contradictions in the warp logic of its environment. A daemon that splits itself into 12 copies. A psyker whose thoughts become recursive. A cult that believes in two opposing truths at once. These are not defenses, they are bait. Because each one creates tension. Emotional, conceptual, metaphysical. And it is in that tension that the warp predator strikes. Some theorize these beings are not even singular entities, but conceptual processes given autonomy by the warp's own need to self-correct, like antibodies in a body of madness. Where the warp becomes too dense, too complex, too contradictory, it births a predator. Not consciously, not willfully, but instinctively. Just as stars collapse under their own mass, so too do ideas. And warp predators are gravity, devouring what cannot sustain itself. This theory, known in some radical ordo-malleus circles as warp apex theory, has terrifying implications. Chief among them, that the chaos gods themselves are not immune. That there may come a time, or has already come, when even Khorne feels the sudden absence of one of his greater demons, not slain in battle, not unraveled by psychic banishment, but forgotten. Not suppressed, not erased, simply overwritten by a deeper law of existence. The law that says, no system can support infinite predators without its own extinction. In this view, the warp is not ruled by the chaos gods. It is tolerated by something older. Something that permits the play of madness until it begins to tear the skin of unreality, and then it feeds. Quietly, precisely, without ceremony. Apex predators do not roar, they do not flaunt, they end. Some of the greatest psychic events in Imperial history, Terra's own Great Rift phenomena, the failure of the Cadian pylons, the manifestation of the Cicatrix maledictum, may not have been caused by warp predators, but they may have drawn them. A Daemon Primarch tearing a hole in reality, a galaxy-wide psychic scream echoing across a billion worlds, the very laws of probability twisting like dead roots. That is not just a war cry. It is a beacon. To Daemons, warp predators are nightmares, but to the warp itself, they are gardeners, pruners of overgrowth, regulators of excess. They do not hunt out of hatred, nor feast out of greed. They do not punish, they balance. It is that very indifference that makes them so much more terrible than the bloodiest Prince of Chaos. If this theory is true, then we are not at war with chaos alone. We are part of a story that does not belong to us, and the ending may already be written, not in fire or in ruin, but in the quiet loss of detail, the melting away of memory, the flattening of the absurd into the permissible, until the warp becomes calm, still, digestible. And if that day comes, the last things to vanish will not be daemons or psychers, but stories. The myths, the cults, the contradictions, all those beautiful insanities that gave the warp its color. And behind it all, the warp predators will move on, quiet and unseen, until the next storm of meaning rises, and must be culled. There are items within the vaults of the Inquisition, the black ships, and the darkest halls of the Adeptus Mechanicus that defy categorization. Not for their destructive power, though many are lethal, but because they resist being known. They are not cursed in the way demon weapons are, nor are they marked by the corruptive touch of chaos. These relics come from places where the warp has fed on reality, and something ancient has fed on the warp. These are the artifacts of the Swallowed. Each of these items was recovered from the aftermath of an encounter with a warp predator. Not scavenged from battlefields, not pulled from daemon tombs, but found adrift, alone, sometimes buried in the flesh of void whales, or caught in the collapsing geometry of ships that returned wrong. They are not weapons, nor tools. They are memories, frozen and deformed. Echoes of what was consumed. One such item is the voice cage, currently held under null seal stasis by the Ordo Malleus on Gathalamor. It appears as a simple vox recorder of archaic design, fused to a crystalline cage that hums in frequencies no ear can hear. When activated, it does not play recordings, but dreams. Not audio, not visual, but experiential. The user does not hear the voices, it becomes them. Becomes one of the Verity's Mercy Psychers moments before the ship's disappearance. The dream begins with the sensation of sedation, the chill of null muzzles, the copper taste of fear, then silence. And then slowly, the unraveling, the sensation of your name being removed, of your memories folding in on themselves like burnt parchment. Users wake screaming or never wake at all. Some simply fall into coma and smile forever. Another relic is the glass halo, recovered from a black ship that vanished and reappeared centuries later with no crew aboard. A small circlet of fused warp crystal and bone, it appears inert until light hits it. Then for a single instant, the observer sees not their reflection, but their absence. Not death, not decay, just a blankness shaped like themselves, a hole in the fabric of possibility. Those who stare too long into this effect report nosebleeds, seizures, or an overwhelming desire to confess sins they never committed. There is also the Hour Coil, a looping, twisting sculpture of ferroglass and soul steel that spins without energy. It was found embedded in the flesh of a dead navigator, her third eye still weeping vaporized warp signs long after death. The coil appears to be a recording, not of time past, but of time denied. Chronosavants who have studied it describe a pattern that loops, shifts, then vanishes into paradox. One claimed it was the final memory of a time-eating entity, the last heartbeat of a timeline that no longer exists. The savant killed himself 12 minutes after recording his findings, though the recording itself has since degraded into static. Each of these artifacts carries not power, but warning. They are not active threats, they are symptoms. The psychic bruises left when a warp predator feeds, like the calcified corpses of abyssal prey dragged up from oceanic depths, they are remnants of events that logic rejects and faith cannot shield against. The Mechanicus refuses to catalog them formally. The Ecclesiarchy refuses to name them. The Inquisition classifies them under codes that seem to shift monthly, as if trying to outrun the attention of something watching. There is an emerging theory among some rogue archivists, those who compile the forbidden data despite knowing it will end in their execution, that these artifacts are not merely aftermath, they are traces, breadcrumbs, that some warp predators do not simply erase, but fracture. And what is left behind are splinters, echoes of consumption that failed to complete. That these items exist at all is evidence that not all prey is fully digested, that even the oldest predators choke. Occasionally. This terrifies the Inquisition more than the predators themselves, for it suggests not only that these beings exist, but that they notice us, that the Imperium's actions can, however slightly, disrupt their feeding, that a mind can resist erasure just enough to scream into an object, that a memory can survive annihilation long enough to warn. And if that is true, then the warp itself may carry antibodies, that beneath all the silence and absence there might be resistance, or worse, revenge. But for now, these artifacts lie in vaults and shadow chambers across the Imperium. They are not studied, they are listened to. Not for knowledge, but for change, for mutation. Because if the relic of a predator shifts, it may mean the predator is still near, or that it remembers, or that it is returning. And no prayer, no purity seal, no rosarius will protect you from that. Among the Dark Mechanicum, where flesh is wire and thought is code, there are forges that do not echo with the songs of the Omnissiah, but with the screams of the broken warp. Here in the endless factories of the blasphemous, the hunger to dominate reality goes further than the chaos-aligned forges of Mars or Lucius could ever dare. It is not enough to serve the dark gods. It is not enough to summon daemons and bind them into engines of war. Some among them seek to bind what should not be bound. They seek to capture the unnameable. They seek to harness warp predators. These projects, whispered of only in the corrupted data vaults of traitor tech priests, are known collectively as the Unbindable Directive. It is not a singular initiative, but a constellation of failed endeavors and partially successful atrocities, each attempting to do the unthinkable. Locate, trap, and weaponize entities that even daemons flee. The reasons vary, from apocalyptic zealotry to the simple thrill of forbidden knowledge, but the result is always the same. Catastrophe. One such effort, the Seraphim Crucible, was constructed in the shattered orbit of the demon world Voraxis. It was a lattice work of null matter coils and impossible angles, forming a trap designed not to hold mass, but to cage contradiction. The Crucible lured a warp predator through a stream of continuously generated paradox signals, pulses of competing psychic truths that forced the entity to investigate. And it worked. For 11 seconds, the predator was seen, not as form, but as fracture. Reality near the Crucible glitched, gravity inverted, time staggered, binary languages collapsed into primal screams. The Adeptus Mechanicus observer drones self-immolated from logical contamination. Then, the trap failed. Or worse, was let fail. The Crucible is now a crater in unreality. The stars around it do not shine. They do not exist. Another attempt was made deep within the hollow engine, a daemon-possessed macro-reactor floating in the warp-flooded bowels of a dying forge moon. There, heretic Magos Karkelion attempted to craft what he called the Omega Lexicon, a script cage built from impossible syntax designed to define a warp predator into obedience. He believed that if you could name a thing properly, You could chain it to your will. The attempt succeeded only in part. The lexicon was read aloud by 7 choir constructs, each made from 12 fused psychers. Upon completion, one of the choir smiled, a smile too wide, too still, and spoke a single word in reverse High Gothic. The rest of the choir liquefied. Carkelian's mind did not shatter. It rewound. He lived the last 6 years of his life in reverse, screaming apologies to things no longer present. The hollow engine is now quarantined by the Iron Warriors, not out of mercy, but because their warsmiths believe it may serve as a baiting tool. Perhaps the most disturbing account is the Thrinotic Furnace, a dark mechanicum experiment designed to torture warp predators into yielding their secrets. A factory shrine constructed from inverted martyr altars and daemon skulls, the furnace did not rely on containment, it relied on pain. Through suffering, it was believed, even the most alien entity could be made to speak. A predator was successfully drawn, its presence inferred through the warping of causality and the silence of lesser demons in nearby sectors. The furnace screamed for 19 days straight. Vox auras transmitted prayers in dead languages. Cogitators chanted backwards. The factory bled mercury. And then it stopped. Not faded. Not powered down. Stopped. The last recorded footage shows a tech priest turning to the camera and mouthing, "We were wrong." His mouth did not match the words. These failures, if one can call events so cosmically catastrophic by such a small term, are not without consequence. The Imperium has noticed the ripples. Ships lost without warp storms. Demons failing to manifest in zones once teeming with their kind. Astartes librarians struck dumb in mid-ritual. These are not isolated phenomena. They are signs of something being stirred. The Dark Mechanicum, in their arrogance, believe they are on the cusp of mastering the predators. But what if they are not? What if they are not capturing anything but feeding it? Each failed trap a flare, each death a sacrifice, each screaming altar an invitation. The predators do not speak. But if they did, perhaps they would not object to such worship. Perhaps it is flattery to be hunted. Perhaps they are learning. And if a warp predator can learn, if it can be shaped by interaction, then the Dark Mechanicum may not be forging weapons. They may be forging gods. New ones. Crueler ones. Ones that do not bargain or seduce, but only erase. The next step in warp evolution, born not of chaos but of cruel, mechanical curiosity. In their greed, they may awaken something no prayer can appease, no ritual can contain. Not a beast, not a weapon, but an idea. One that hungers, one that understands, and one that remembers who taught it pain. Among the endless contradictions of the Immaterium, perhaps none is more unnerving than this. Even daemons can be afraid. They were not made for it. Fear is not part of their essential function. Daemons are born of fear, rage, lust, despair. They are made of emotion, not subject to it. But when it comes to the warp predators, the old nightmares that prowl the edge of unreality, even daemons falter. Even the avatars of chaos recoil. And the chaos gods, they fall silent. It is not silence born of respect or rivalry. It is something deeper, more primal. The absence of commentary in a realm where every whisper shapes existence. No scripture in the grimoires of Tzeentch describes these predators. No corrupted sermon of Slaanesh alludes to them. The skull thrones of Khorne do not bear their symbols. Nurgle's gardens do not list them among his pests. It is not just that the chaos gods avoid them, it is that they refuse to acknowledge them. As if doing so might render them more real. This silence is not uniform. In ancient rituals rarely practiced even by the most radical inquisitors, a curious pattern emerges. Demons summoned near warp scars or psychic nulls sometimes hesitate, not as if held by wards, but as if sensing the echo of something they do not wish to disturb. They glance sidelong, though they have no eyes. They flinch at symbols they do not recognize. They speak in riddles, or not at all. One Tzeentchian horror, when asked by a sorcerer what it feared, replied, "The edits." It would say nothing more before dissolving into 1,000 shrieking syllables that bled from the walls of the ritual chamber for weeks. This behavior is not demonic strategy. Demons do not bluff. They cannot lie in the traditional sense. They are what they express. So when they falter, when they are seized by uncharacteristic caution or flee battle without a clear cause, something deeper is at work. It is not rare for bloodletters to vanish mid-frenzy, not due to banishment, but as if their rage had been noticed by something greater. The flesh dissolves. the axe clatters, and a whisper of static settles in the air. In the deeper warp, within the realms of the Chaos Gods themselves, there are blind spots. Places even the demonic cartographers do not mark. Non-places. Places where color fails, where sensation is replaced with forgetting. These are not prisons, they are habitats, and they are left undisturbed, not out of fear, but out of refusal. The gods do not speak of these regions, and thus their realms do not shape them. In the warp, speech is creation. The unspoken is the unmade. These blind spots are a form of self-defense. Some have argued that this silence suggests impotence, that even the Chaos Gods are subordinate to these predators. Others suggest the opposite, that the warp predators are tools, ancient safeguards encoded into the warp by the gods themselves, to prevent excess. But this theory collapses under scrutiny. Because the warp is excess. It is endless hunger. The notion that the Chaos Gods would create something that consumes without emotion, that ends stories rather than complicates them, is anathema to their nature. A third, more chilling hypothesis is that the Chaos Gods do not understand the warp predators, that even their near-omniscient perceptions blur when trying to view them. They are not afraid because they are weak. They are afraid because they are ignorant. That these entities emerged not from belief or passion, but from a different axis of reality, an axis the Chaos Gods cannot access. To them, warp predators are not rivals, they are impossibilities. There is ancient fragmentary evidence for this. Lost lines in the Book of Untruth. Glyphs that weep saltwater when read aloud. One such glyph, translated loosely, reads, "When the first thought screamed, the first silence answered, and the scream forgot itself." The Chaos Gods are screams, roaring conflagrations of emotion and change. Warp predators are silence, and the scream cannot grasp silence without ending itself. This is why no demon prince speaks of them. Why no great demon lord carves their image into flesh temples. Why even the blasphemous texts of forbidden cults skip over their mention. It is not taboo, it is anti-theology. The Chaos Gods need worship, they need narrative. Warp predators devour both, and to a being made of story, that is annihilation. Some theorists argue that this makes the warp predators the truest counter to chaos. Not the Emperor, not the Stan, not the Old Ones, but the simple fact that in a universe of noise there exists something that consumes sound. Not to kill, but because it must. And so the Chaos Gods say nothing, they remain silent. And in their silence, we hear everything we need to know. Something is out there. Something even they dare not name. If a warp predator hungers for you, it already knows you. Not your body, not your soul, you. The parts of you that persist when language fails. The deep, ineffable sense of self that survives torture, indoctrination, and oblivion. These things are not hunted by scent or sound, they are hunted by recognition, by the gravitational pull of difference. The very trait that allows a soul to manifest in the warp is the trait that attracts these monsters. Individuality. Identity. A footprint of thought on the skin of unreality. And once such a predator has noticed you, it cannot be reasoned with. It does not negotiate, it does not hate, it simply remembers. And when the time comes, it acts. Swiftly. Irrevocably. No wards will stop it. No Jeller field will obscure you. Because to it you are not hiding, you are resonating. In the coldest interpretations of the forbidden texts, warp predators are not just apex threats, they are existential proofs. They exist to remind all things that no story is safe, no god eternal, no madness untouchable, that the warp, for all its infinite chaos, contains within it the capacity for closure. And closure is death for a dream. If one predator could fully awaken, if it chose to uncoil from whatever dimensional fold it hides within, what would that mean for the galaxy? The Chaos Gods would not fall in battle. They would not die screaming. They would simply stop being believed. Cults would forget their chance. Possessions would fail mid-incantation. The warp storms would flatten into eerie calm. And psychers, robbed of the metaphysical scaffolding that upheld their powers, would fall silent forever. Not in agony, in confusion. This is the true terror of the warp predators. Not that they destroy, but that they undo. Every cathedral of madness, every monument to divine hate, every whisper of godhood built on fear. All of it, not just toppled but cancelled. Like a dream the moment you wake. Gone, leaving only the bitter trace of having once meant something. What can be done? The Imperium, in its grand and brutal stupidity, has no answer. The Ordo Malleus denies because denial is safety. The ecclesiarchy forbids even the idea of such beings, for to admit that something greater than the ruinous powers exists and that it is not divine is to open a theological wound that can never heal. The Eldari dare not name them. The Necrons, for all their pride, remain silent. And the Tyranids, those great devourers of biomass, seem curiously absent from regions where warp predators feed. Perhaps even they recognize futility. Only fragments remain. A ritual that once delayed a predator by 12 seconds. A shard of an artifact that kept a psyker sane for the final 3 words of his life. A glyph that, when painted in the blood of twins, slows forgetting for half a breath. Nothing useful, nothing that saves, just echoes. Just desperate claw marks on the walls of an asylum no longer built for mortals. And yet, perhaps that is enough. Because if they hunger, they notice. And if they notice, they can see. And if they see, perhaps, just perhaps, they know. And in that knowledge, in that ancient terrible awareness of pattern and contradiction, there lies a flicker of resistance. Because to recognize is to define. And definition is the first chain. We do not pray to stop them. That would be foolish. But we remember, we tell stories. We mark the void with impossible names. We whisper warnings into the ears of our children, even when we do not know what they mean. Because in a galaxy where even gods are prey, memory is the last rebellion, and silence is surrender. So speak their name, not aloud, but in thought. Let them know we know. And if they come for us, let them choke on everything we are. If you've made it this far into this forbidden chronicle, subscribe to this channel. Help keep these truths alive. We speak them not to be heard, but so they can never be forgotten.